Janice, Trey, thank you so much for joining us today on the Amy Robbins Show. It's so great to see you.
Amy, thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Janice, you and I had the honor of sitting down with you and briefly hearing about your story when we were at the conference America Fest a couple of months ago. So I'm just really thrilled that you're going to come back and share this in a little bit more in-depth nature with our audience. So let's get right into it, shall we?
Sure, certainly.
So I want to kick this off by having you tell the audience about a single moment in that labor camp that you will never forget, where you realized the CCP's cruelty as a child.
I actually received paper slips that were from the balloons that flew from Taiwan. And in the slips, they talk about we don't ride on bicycles. We have private cars. We have refrigerator, and so it was. I at that time I have no idea. I asked my parents, "What's the refrigerator? What's private car?" Because in the labor camp there was one military car, which is like a huge truck that there's no sittings. People stood on the back. It was just those military vehicles, and so and then they said they have television sets in their own home. So the whole labor camp has one television set. There were two times that we watched television was Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai's funerals. Everybody must stood in front of the televisions wearing something black, and I didn't have anything black, and so they took a piece of black cloth and cut it and clipped something on the shoulder area. So everybody must wear something black. So that was in the labor camp. It was a closed society, so you have no idea what's the world outside, and so that moment really planted questions for me. And then until when I visited my grandfather in Hong Kong, he has a television set. There was cartoon, like a lot of programming on TV versus like the contrast with only watch TV for the funerals. And I was certainly got on private cars, so, and there was refrigerators, you have ice cream, you have all those choices that it was non-existent in the labor camp.
Can you set the stage for us? Because I think when we say labor camp, people in America don't even have a frame of reference to even understand what was going on, how you got to a labor camp. Can you paint a picture for us about what exactly you were having to do and how you got to the labor camp in the first place?
It was during Cultural Revolution. My parents were college graduate engineers, just based on the sheer reasons that they were educated. They were sent to labor camps so that they could not do engineering work, but do farmings, do sowings, and so totally in a very remote areas. How remote it was for me to go to school, it took me 1.5 hours walking past the crop field, up the hill, past the cemetery. The school was on the other side of the hill. So I walked through like bushes, and sometimes my neighbor will throw a stone into the bushes, and the snake will came out. I ran for life, and so it was very primitive. There was no toys. Like the toys were pretty much you do stone and you do stick, and those were toys that we make our own toys to play. My work at the labor camp was we grew sugar cane on the top of the hill. I carry fertilizers who were almost heavier than myself. At least I felt that way. And then during harvest season, they use hand tools to harvest. So some crop fields were dropped on the floor. So we walk hours every day after school to pick up crops dropped on the field. We must fill up a full plastic bag. Otherwise, we were not allowed to return to school without a full plastic bag. So it was a lot of pressure every day, walk hours and hours after school. So it was tough situation, and there were no and in the during Cultural Revolution at school every day we were forced to sing the song praising the Mao Zedong. There were no Mozart, no Beethoven, any classical culture, not just traditional Chinese culture, but Western culture, classical culture was suppressed. And until I went to Hong Kong, I actually compared the textbooks of the same historic periods that was in textbook of Hong Kong, textbook of mainland China, and textbook of Taiwan. I found totally different descriptions, and I was wondering which versions was the truth. There must be one and only one truth.
Was so was there ever an end in sight for you to leave the labor camps? How did they ensure that you didn't leave?
Well, in China, there's something called 户口, kind of your residency status, and you're not allowed to move freely. In the U.S., you can move from state to state, and you can restart and no implications. But if you want to have a job, if you want to go to school, they check your residence status. So it would be extremely difficult. And because it was in so remote area, you also don't have transportations to go.
Hmm.
I finally left because my grandfather was a successful banker before communism. In fact, he had his own bank. During my mom's childhood, he had chauffeur to take her to Catholic school. And when communism came, they robbed his bank. They took away his antique collection, his painting collection. So he fled to Hong Kong and restarted in a warehouse as a security guard. And so when he was sick, I went to Hong Kong to take care of him. And my father knows that Einstein believes in God. And in China, you don't have the opportunity during cultural revolutions. So he sent me to a Christian school because he wants me to have opportunity to learn Christianity.
Wow. So I'm just wondering, I know this was a long time ago, but growing up with forced labor and indoctrination, did you ever have a act of rebellion that gave you just a small glimmer of hope that you remember?
During the labor camp, we have no idea what's the external world, and we have no idea when it would end. And so I would say the slips from the balloons uh, gave me the inspirations that there could be something different than what I experienced. And I long for seeing what's like of not riding on bicycles. It was something better than bicycle. There was refrigerators and you could have, ice cream. And so that was like interesting. A television in their own home. That seems, very interesting.
So, what was the first moment? When did you actually make the transition from China over to America?
That was after the Tiananmen Square massacre. I was lucky that I wasn't at the square. My best friend, Dr. Pan, he was a medical student, and at the Tiananmen Square, he personally carried dozens and dozens of dead bodies and injured students. So the scale of the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4, 1989 were far serious and widespread. And that triggered my decisions and my family's decisions to apply for colleges in the United States. And I did, and then I came. Yeah.
And what was that? What was it like? What was the first moment when you felt true freedom in America?
So I landed in Texas. University of Texas Austin was known as the best bargain, high rank and low cost of living. And I chose Austin because it's located in the state capital. I thought I have a better chance of getting part-time jobs, and in warm weather because I could not afford to have winter clothes. So my first roommate was Hispanic. I've never met a Hispanic in China or in Hong
Yeah.
Kong, and was very different. But I was very grateful. So I have host family, Rhonda and Randy Goss, and they have 3 kids, and so they embraced me and took me for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, and so I finally felt the family warm because back then I call my parents and my brother once a week under 3 minutes because it's charged minimum 3 minutes, and that was the time limit. In fact, my brother, on the other hand, will say, "Sister, there's 30-second countdown, 20 seconds cut." So it was, yeah.
Well, and what was that like? I mean, what was freedom like for you when you got here? What did it smell like? What did it feel like?
Well, so my host families, the kids, they can do whatever they like. Like I compare my childhood versus their childhood.
Hmm.
So my child in labor camp, and they get to play sports. They don't have to, pick up crops from the fields. They didn't have to grow sugar cane, and they were so encouraging. Like there was like Bible study. So it was just you can discuss anything, and there's no restrictions. So to me that
Hmm.
was the freedom. And then when I was in college, the choice of the classes, and also in the class that you could have that open discussions with the professors, and you can ask almost like no off limit questions. At least I felt like that. And that was like a breath of fresh air. That was totally different
So
than
you
time.
have this new experience. You're here, you're learning, you're seeing how everybody else is living. What did you want to then go do with your new freedom?
I spent 3 decades in corporate America, and I believe in making informed decisions. And I think that's really important, for businesses having the proper information to make the decisions. And but then when I have the opportunity to lead the Epoch Times and the NDD TV, I felt like give a voice to the voiceless. I was lucky. I could have died during the Cultural Revolutions. I could have died during Tiananmen Square massacre. But the fact that I'm still alive, and there are 1.4 billion Chinese who don't have the freedom that I have. And if
Hmm.
there's one thing I can do, I would say bring uncensored information in and out of China. And that's what NDTV and the Epoch Times have been doing for over 2 decades. And I
Well,
felt
I was
like,
actually going to ask that. Yeah, what drew you to the Epoch Times, knowing, and was it at that point a direct challenge to the CCP's propaganda machine?
yeah, so the Epoch Times and NDTV have been known as the number one enemy of the Chinese Communist Party, which we wear as a badge of honor because we are the only media consistently for over 2 decades to expose the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, the Epoch Times published the 9 commentaries of the Communist Party. And let me give you, take a look of the book I have. And this book, 9 commentaries of the Chinese Communist Party, have inspired 440 million Chinese withdrew from the Chinese Communist Party memberships and the affiliated organization. They have the Youth League and Young Pioneers, the younger versions of that. And this is very significant, is triggering the transitions and transformations from a communist state to a new communist state. For 5,000 years, there were no communisms in Chinese histories. It's only in the past decades, and it was imported from Russia, and then they mobilized the farmers, promised redistribute the land to the farmers. They never did, but they took away the lands and they start food rationing. So when people's survival based on the food offer through the rationing programs, they silence themselves. And
Hmm.
then 10 years of cultural revolutions, just how I grew up in the labor camps, lots of people like my parents were sent to labor camps and in order to silence them. And then the Tiananmen Square massacres, where students have no weapons, they want democracy. 1989 was the same period where Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Union dissolved, and Eastern Europe changed from communistic states to new communistic states. China was offered the exact opportunity, but instead, they roll out the tank, they crush the students, and then in 1999, they started the persecution on Falun Gong, which is a spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. So if you look back, every decade or so, an innocent group of peoples, nothing wrong with them, but they were picked by the Communist parties for persecution in a way to censor and to have people self-censor themselves so they won't speak up, because they know communism was not part of the culture. And they're very worried, in particular, Falun Gong focused on truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. They worry about the revival of the traditional values as a contrast of communism, which is based on ruled by propaganda, violence, totally opposites of their beliefs.
Do you start to get nervous when you see things happening in America that remind you of communism, where you're starting to see suppression and censorship and groups of people in our country wanting to move us more towards communism or embracing communistic beliefs? Does that give you a reason to just stop and be alarmed?
I was very, very concerned. I mean, I don't want my kids to grow up in a free America and then have to deal with what I encounter back in China. And this, I felt the same for, as parents, you don't want other kids, that the next generation is the pillar for the future societies. And when they start destroying statues, when they have, violence, on campus, all those things, if I felt like it was a orchestrated efforts, very similar to cultural revolutions. And then they also create the divisiveness. Communism was known for class struggles. They have people fight against each others. And when you see the divisives in these countries, I felt like it was the communism playbooks. In fact, in 2018, the Epoch Times published the specter of communism ruling the world, showing how communism systematically infiltrated into all facets of society in the Western world. And through different labels, maybe climate change, like you use Confucius Institute, which was in the name of teaching Chinese, but they actually spread the communist propaganda because they only allow teachers directly imported from China, and they use textbook exclusively imported from China, rather than people like me who are bilingual, who are capable in teaching. They won't take me to teach Chinese in the Confucius Institutes. And they have the Confucius Institutes in order to suppress campus activities that may be more pro-democracy, more pro-human rights. And as a matter of fact, give you an example, in Harvard, which I'm an alumni for the business school, when there was a medical conference about forced organ harvesting, where people were killed on demand, was initiated by Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, a nonprofit organization, along with the Harvard clubs, student clubs, that they have invited, many, dozens of medical professors have signed up to attend this events, and with distinguished speakers, including speakers nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, awardee for Mother Teresa for award for social justice. And then the Chinese Communist Party, through one of the medical professors, to influence and tell all the professors don't come to these events. So this is like infiltrations on American soils, where we should have the freedoms. The doctors, the medical professors from Harvard Medical School have signed up and planned to attend, and they were told like not to attend. So I think it's really alarming. In fact, the transnational repressions we were able to trace back for more than 2.5 years ago. Xi Jinping specifically ordered the exports of the persecution on Falun Gong on American soil, using proxy, using social media, YouTubers, and systematically to target the Falun Gong community. Let me give you an example. Shenyun Performing Arts, which is known as the world-class classical Chinese dance with a live orchestra combining Western and Eastern musics, and it reached 1 million audience a year. And so their tactic was they gave bomb threats, for example, like at the Kennedy centers. As a result, during the cold winters, everybody were asked to evacuate from the Kennedy Center without no time to even get the heavy coats and all that. They were in the process of rehearsing on the opening dates, and all the staff, went out, stood hours until they were returned. There was no real bomb, but they used that tactics to harass. And they did similar things. They called Lincoln Center and trying to stop the shows. The end result was Lincoln Center proceed with the show. All 18 shows were sold out. They have to add seats. It's almost equivalent to having like a 19 shows because of added more than 1,000 seats, and very well received. They are billionaires. They are top former Metropolitan Opera House lead dancer, CEOs and top legal experts. Everybody gave very positive feedback. But you see the contrast on American soil, the Chinese Communist Party trying to stop Americans from seeing a show that's produced by Chinese Americans, mostly US citizens and based in upstate New York.
Wow. Okay, you mentioned something briefly just a minute ago, and you said organ harvesting. And I wanted to get into that because the Epoch Times actually was the first publication to break the story about forced organ harvesting in 2006. What was it like to break a story like that to the world?
Yeah, I was actually at the Fertilizers Squares when the news was broke. And so Annie, who was a nurse from the Sujiatun hospitals, along with Peter, a journalist a Chinese journalist working in Japan. The two of them were first time to broke the news. So Annie, her husband, was a surgeon. He removed more than 2,000 corneas, the corneas from the eyes. And so he was telling Annie, like, find a ways to get out of China. They got really rich very quickly, but he had a lot of nightmare, always woke up in the middle of nightmare. And so Annie was just trying to figure out what's really going on. And what came to his conscience was one of the operations, there was something dropped from the persons, and there was a greeting like "Mom, happy birthday," and there was something related to Falun Gong, the emblems and all that. So it came to the conscience because they have a daughter, and he can relate, and he felt himself like riding on the tiger. He could not get off the tiger, and he was also worried about proceeding, and so he wanted to stop until they were able to get out of China. And Annie is a Christian, and so she felt like the redemptions would be by exposing it, because she knew under the Sujiatun hospitals in Northeast China, there were thousands of Falun Gong practitioners in detentions. They were being killed on demand for the organs when they matched with the blood type and tissue types. And Annie's best friend is accountant for that Sujiatun hospitals. And this accountant also told her all of a sudden they have, order so many medications that's related to
Hmm.
post-transplants. And
So,
so,
just so we're clear here on this, the organ harvesting piece to all of this, are you saying that they would intentionally kill people and sell their body parts or their organs?
yes. In fact, my husband and I attended the World Transplant Congress in summer of 2006. So this, Annie and Peter broke the news in the spring of 2006. At the World Transplant Congress, I met Dr. Wei Liu from the Tianjin Oriental Transplant Center right after the reception. First Lady gave the remarks. The reception was very crowded. A lot of Chinese doctors were there. And I asked Dr. Wei Liu, I said, what's your specialty? He told me liver. And I said, how many liver transplant you personally have done? He said 2,000. 2,000
Is that a
himself.
lot?
It's huge. And I checked with like doctors from Canada, doctors from other countries. The entire country have less than that numbers that he personally did. In fact, a group of those doctors who went to the World Transplant Congress in summer 2006. They visited the Massachusetts General Hospitals and met with the transplant experts. They were shocked how many transplants that this group of Chinese doctors did in China, way more than their entire lifetimes. So at the World Transplant Congress, the day after, and then I asked Dr. Wei Liu, I said, well, how many transplant centers in the city of Tianjin, which is second tier city? And he said 3. I said, how many transplant centers across China? Over 500. Then the very next day, I saw the disappearance of those Chinese doctors from the night before at the reception. So I asked the one who sat next to me, who's a researcher, Chinese researcher who's working at University of Hamburg in Germany. And he told me they were all picked up by pharmaceutical companies to Hawaii, to Disney. That's why they won't attend the rest of the conference, but he has a poster presentation, so he need to stay back. I said, and he told me he got 2 job offers to go back to China to set up 2 transplant centers with enormous amounts of money. And I said, well, you are in Germany. You can have a second child. Why do you want to go back? And I said, where's the organ source? Because people believe in reincarnations. So you don't want missing pieces in your next life. And also people don't trust communistic governments of like, if you, unlike in the US on the driver license, you may do the donation and you believe that you truly, when you die and then they will take it. But in communist China, they wouldn't believe that they will do it, after you're dead. But they may, if they match everything, they may kill you. And so he told me to walk outside the Boston Convention Center. He told me that I will find my answer. When I walk out, I saw screenshots of the different transplant centers across China, and then with the price tags, say 60,000 US dollars for kidney, $120,000 for hearts, $100,000 for a liver and pancreas, and like all the different price tag, cornea, so on and so forth. It added up to about $1 million US dollars. And then they promise match blood type, tissue types with 4 to 6 weeks. And those websites were in multiple languages, in
Whoa.
Farsi, in, German, French, all sorts of languages.
So
So,
advertising, basically
yes,
advertising that we can
yes,
get you whatever you want. It's like a
yep,
menu. Whatever
yeah.
organ you want, whatever, as long as it matches. Janice, who were the people that they were getting these organs from?
Yeah. So they targeted the Falun Gong practitioners because they don't drink, they don't smoke. So nobody want a smoker's lung. Nobody want a alcoholic person's liver or kidney. Not only that, because they practice the exercise, 5 sets of gentle exercise, that open up the energy channels, and then they were known for the healthiest group in China. In fact, there have been 4 large-scale health surveys, and each of those over 10,000 sample size. So in aggregate, over 50,000 sample size. The health improvement rate was like 96 to 98%. So, in fact, there were scientific research that shows that their body cells, because of their exercise every day, and this like Tai Chi type of exercise, their cells have a stronger immune. In fact, during the 2003 SARS respiratory disease, Falun Gong practitioners, they are more resist to the virus. And so it
So
was widespread known that they are healthier. And so why they can cure on demand for the Falun Gong practitioners? Because Jiang Zemin, a bit background, Jiang Zemin was the mayor of Shanghai in 1989. And he was so successful in crack down the student movement in Shanghai that the world did not know about it, only knew about it in Beijing Tiananmen Square. So overnight, he was promoted from a mayor to be the head of Chinese Communist Party. He was known as the Chinese Hitler, rose to power because of brutalities. In fact, his father was a trader during the China-Japan War. He could play the pianos during war times because his father was betraying China. And so Jiang Zemin was the one who started the persecution on Falun Gong when he was traveling in France, and he declared Falun Gong as illegal. And then they make up laws to, apply retroactively when there
yeah.
was nothing wrong with Falun Gong. And why Falun Gong was being targeted? Because they because of the ideology, they believe in truth, compassion, tolerance, versus, communism was totally opposite. And because there were 70 to 900 million people practice. In fact, the February edition of the U.S. News Reports interview the head of like sports committees in China, and the official said that it saved 1,000 yuan Chinese currency, about $130 worth per persons, and there were over 70 million people practice, and so that saved lots of money. So that's how it spread word of mouth. In fact, in the Chinese medical systems, for those who work for the government enterprise, you pay out of pocket, and then you submit the reimbursement to your managers and get reimbursement.
So
And
I'm confused on this process though. As you're
yes.
doing this research on
Mhm.
organ harvesting,
Yes.
what did you find as to the process when they found somebody and targeted them to murder them and take their organs? How were they getting to were people volunteering signing up for this
No.
or
Yeah, so the persecution, they started the persecution, and then they put them into labor camps as a free labor. And that's why you can buy certain Chinese goods extremely low cost. And while they were in labor camps being tortured, they do extensive blood type, tissue type testings. If you want to know the blood type, you just, very little amounts of blood, you can tell it. But they take syringe for animals that they take huge amounts, and then you see them disappear when they have a match organs with
so you
the
essentially knew if you were going to one of these labor camps during that time that this could be your fate.
this is what happened. Of course, the people in the labor camp, they may not know. So I actually arranged a nurse, a head nurse, interviewed by NPR. And the head nurse with medical knowledge, and she refused to be drawn for the bloods, and they have like 9 policemen to press her down to force, and then use the animal type of syringe, draw a huge amount of bloods. And so when she was interviewed by NPR, she told the story, and she because it's very expensive to do all the blood drawing and testing and so forth, so there must be a return on investment. And why would they
Sure.
do that? And why would people disappear after the blood draw and all that, and only the Falun Gong practitioners. In fact, the Uyghur people have said that when they were in labor camps, they say, oh, primarily the Falun Gong practitioners were targeted because they don't drink, they don't smoke, they are known to be the healthiest. In fact, David Matas and David Kilgore, the two Canadian investigators, David Kilgore was the former Secretary of State for Asia Pacific and Latin Americas, and also the deputy chair for the Member of Parliament in Canada. And then David Matas as a human rights lawyer, Jewish lawyers, and who got the Order of Canada. They did investigations. And so they have people calling into China in 2006, calling different hospitals, and someone pretending say, my cousins or my brother need a kidney, need a liver, and we heard that the Falun Gong people, they are healthy and young, and they said, no problem, just come, we have plenty of that. And
Wow.
so they published the report. That was the very first report published. Guess what the Chinese Communist Party's or the Chinese consulate's reaction? They point out the discrepancies of the reports with two mismatch of the city and the province. So think of the
Mm.
city and the states. That was the only thing they can say about it. That means the rest of the report was accurate. And David Kilgore and David Matas, they traveled to dozens of countries and they've been, exposing this. And so let me just wrap it. So for organ harvesting in China, unlike other places, there are systematic organ donation system, but in China, Red Cross tried for decades, unsuccessful. So in China, it was queue for on demand by the Falun Gong practitioners because they will, many of those do not disclose the family situation because they don't want
Hmm.
to go after the family members, so they become more vulnerable because that's a group of people that they can just kill them on demand and without the family asking for where the person's right. So it's actually continue today. I can give you another example. Dr. Jacob Ravi in Israel, I visited him in Tel Aviv, and he's a world famous heart surgeon. His patients told him, Dr. Ravi, the insurance broker told me that I'm scheduled for heart transplants in 2 weeks, this date and time. And Dr. Levy said, impossible to know in advance by 2 weeks that somebody that matched particularly with your blood type and tissue types will die and the organs will be ready for transplant. But his patient indeed got the heart transplant on the scheduled day and time. And since then, Dr. Levy have put forward legislations to ensure that the standards have to be meeting the Israeli standard. He's most worried that if um, if hospitals in China will kill people on demand for the organs, they may not give the matched organs, and because they want to take the money. And then if you get transplant with a not match ones, your survival rate was very low. And so there are plenty of evidence of the forced organ harvesting, and unfortunately, it's continue to happen today.
What a crazy story you guys broke, and but also just what a pivotal moment for you guys. And I just want to know, as a CEO, how do you stay fearless with the CCP backlash and targets as they target your organization?
Well, um, I'm fortunate to be alive in front of you, Amy. And there are so many who have died. And I feel like I have the responsibility to give a voice to the voiceless. And I'm grateful that my colleagues at Epoch Times and NDTV, they've been fierce in the reporting, the courageous in reporting. We have journalists who were sentenced to more than 10 years just by helping to bring the news. I personally have death threats, and they have, done many things to my vehicles, to my, all sorts of things. But it actually emboldened me to give the voice because I feel like that's indicators that we are doing something really important. Otherwise, why would they target me, right? And I am hopeful that the Chinese Communist regime will dissolve pretty quickly. With this book, we have inspired 440 million people. And with the Chinese tariff, the tariff situation, the tariff wars, in fact, the Communist China is trying to instigate anti-American sentiments. And the Epoch Times and NDTV have been providing what the real stories, why President Trump's put the tariffs, and also show them why all the other countries reacted differently than China. And so able to reduce the anti-American sentiments. Our TV broadcasts into China through multiple satellites. In fact, we have reached over 100 million in China. And our newspapers, Epoch Time published in 35 countries and regions and 23 languages. And people use VPN and also the anti-censorship tools, the free gaze and ultrasurf, and able to get our information. We've been courageous in our reporting about COVID, for example. We broke the news about COVID in December 2019. In fact, we have subscribers in the US bought N95 masks because that's the surgical level of mask with plenty of supplies and regular price. And then our subscriber who were traveling to China, they changed their return tickets and able to get back to US, avoided the lockdown. When their colleagues and relatives on the same scheduled flights of returns, they never make it back. They die of
Wow.
COVID inside China. So we know our media is saving lives. And that was the driving force. I mean, by courageously reporting things that other media shy away from reporting, if we could save lives, I mean, I'm just only one life, but if through the media, if we could save more lives, I think it's worth
Yep.
it.
Well, that's our mission too. We applaud you, your fearlessness. We love what you're doing. I am just so grateful that y'all are out there and not self-censoring and not backing down. And that's really our mission here as well. We're a part of the Parler family. Parler powers Play TV. We were the first free speech platform, and we will continue to be. When news came out about Mark Zuckerberg working hand in hand, they just had a whistleblower saying he was working hand in hand with the Chinese government to take down posts and suppress posts. That's what big tech is doing. They're doing it here in America. They're doing it overseas, but you have our guarantee that we're not going to do that. We're going to let the free flow of information get out there. And it's important to do that for all the reasons, that you mentioned. Please tell everybody where they can find your book and where they can go to watch the TV show or the station that you were talking about, as well as maybe get a subscription to the Epoch Times.
Yes, the 9 commentaries of the Communist Party, you can go onto the Epoch Times website, which is theepochtimes.com, and you can subscribe. And in fact, we're starting a special for the veterans too. So I hope everybody subscribe. And then for the TV is NED TV. This is a cover that's we are ranked as the top 20 ethical innovations companies that's trustworthy companies. And so you can get on our TV NTD, through websites, and also we're on cable, we're on satellites, and also in over the top type of the Yoku and some other means. And so we are 501c3 organizations. Pretty much the subscriptions fund our operations, and that's keep us independent, not subject to influence by any governments or individuals, and that's very important. And Amy, I applaud your work and to uphold the traditional journalisms and integrities that we don't
Well,
bend down.
thank you so much, Janice, for joining us today. I can't wait for our audience to hear this full episode of the Amy Robbins Show with you, Janice Trey. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could ask her to go into about what that massacre was. I've never heard of that massacre.
Oh, Tiananmen Square massacre. Yeah, you want me to ask her really fast? Okay, yeah. Janice, I have my producers asking me to have you just give a little bit of background on the Tiananmen Square massacre, if you don't mind.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
All right. Janice, for those in our audience who might not have even been born when this event happened, can you give some context to what happened at Tiananmen Square?
So at Tiananmen Square, students were protesting. They want democracy, just like it was 1989, and it was early June periods, and students have been camping out in the squares, and they're on shifts, and they want democracies. And in China, there has been an underground systems. They built it because of in anticipation of nuclear war. Underground have shield more radiations. And so China have the underground system. That's where the tank move. You don't see the tank moving from other places. All of a sudden they pop up because the entire underground system. And so the tank came up. Some of you may remember the students stood in front of the tank, one of very courageous ones. At Epoch Times and NUTV, our executive vice president, Dr. Samuel Zhou, he was at the square. He was so tired that he went back to the dorm to take a nap, and that was when the tank rolled out. He could have died, and that was why he was very steadfast in helping the media and to bring uncensored information in and out of China. In the Tiananmen Square massacre, they used surveillance cameras and to catch people who left the square. And that's the Communist parties. They crush people. That in contra, in Berlin, the Berlin Wall came down, and then in Hungary, right, and other Eastern Europe, like Ambassador Mark Palmer, like march with the U.S. Ambassador Mark Palmer, march with the people in Hungary and help the liberations to a new common state in Hungary, and the Soviet Union dissolved. You have to look at communisms were not rooted in the thousands years of histories.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people worry, worry about the disability, the instability if China shift to a different style. We have to remember for 5,000 years, there were no communisms.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in China, they have different dynasty, the Tang dynasty, the Qing dynasty, Ming dynasty, so many dynasty. So every time with the dynasty change, you didn't have like that much of this instabilities. So I think people need to think about China could transit into a very peaceful way. Just like the 9 commentaries on the Communist Party inspire people to withdraw from the Communist Party memberships. And that's a peaceful transformations. And what the Chinese people want to hear is Americans to speak up. They actually look up to Americans. They want to hear that we support them. It's important to engage with the citizens levels. Leaders come and go, but the citizens are more long-lived. And so our values, our democracy, our religious freedoms, those are very important. Think of communism as antichrist.
Yep.
And so this is our opportunity to tell people in China, we know that you will embrace religious liberty. For 5,000 years, there were religious liberties, but not under communism. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, ending communism will not only free the people in China, but also free the people in Cuba, free the people in North Korea, and to remove the nuclear threat from North Korea. And so it's really important. And so I think anyone interested, at the Epoch Times, we have tons of information about that. And anyone who want to learn about what's China like before communism, go check out Shenyang Performing Arts, because they showcase 5,000 years of civilization before communism. And all the bomb threats and all that was staged. The Communist Party trying to stop people from knowing what's the China like without communism.
Yeah. Thank you, Janice.